I'm only taking one step at a time towards healing myself. I had to get out, I find a way out. No more living in pain or misery. It's all about protecting my energy. Keep the negative away from me, because I am just keeping my peace. Cut off everything that no longer was serving me, and I chose to start loving myself. I walk in my purpose, no looking back, I'm only going within. Be old, standing there, a better version of me. I must say that I'm proud of me. It's not about how you feel, I'm living proof that God is real. So let me show you how to heal. Damn it, I'm wearing it well, cause I came a long way. My journey isn't yet complete, that's what it look like to heal. Damn it, I'm wearing it well, I'm proud of myself. It's nothing to it, you can do it, all you gotta do is just fight through it. Creative soul, creative soul, creative soul. Just fight through it. Creative soul, creative soul, creative soul, creative soul, yeah, yeah.
Welcome to Pain to Purpose podcast, where we have open discussions to heal together as a community. Today we're on episode 32, and we're talking about broken, transformed to triumph. And our special guest is Bambi Lynn. Welcome, Miss Bambi.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that we had this conversation back and forth before we started. So I'm really excited to be on your show.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm really good. It's sun shining in the Golden Isles, so I'm good.
Okay, great. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to let our audience know that we still have Pain to Purpose podcast t-shirts, as well as our Pain to Purpose tumblers that you can purchase. All you have to do is email me at creativesoul.business@gmail.com. Again, that's creativesoul.business@gmail.com. Thank you. Let's get into this story with Miss Bambi. So, Miss Bambi, I know you have a book out. What's the name of the book?
I do. I actually have two books, but the one that we're really going to talk about is actually my journey. It's called The Journey of Josephine. The doll, my name is not Josephine. People will email me and say, "Hi, Josephine." The Josephine is my rag doll that was given to me as a 6-year-old little girl that became my security blanket and became my secret confidant.
I thought your name was Josephine at first too.
Yeah, so a lot of people do think that. I just named it The Journey of Josephine because she went on the journey with me. And if I didn't have her as my security blanket and as my confidant, and she carried all my tears, I don't know if I could have made it, but I did.
Okay. So when did this start?
My journey or my pain?
When did the pain start?
I would say, since I was a little girl, my dad was an alcoholic. He wasn't a nice one, so I grew up in a very volatile home. And my parents went back and forth with each other. My mom would not take so much, and then we would move in with my grandparents. And then my mom would take my dad back. So ever since I was a little girl, I've only known trauma. And, it's not until my 50s now that I realize who I am, because when you are brought up with so much trauma, it redefines who God has created you to be. And so you have to really go through the process of becoming, who you were always created to be. So the trauma started when I was a young girl. And then my grandfather also had molested me, when I was a little girl. I also, my dad.
How old were you when that happened?
I was about 4 or 5, and I would go to my grandparents' house, and people ask me if I told anybody, and there's different conversations that people have. I never told anybody until my grandmother died, because I couldn't ruin my grandmother's home, because where was my grandmother going to go? But then years later, after my grandmother did pass away, the rest of the family did tell the secret that there was more than just me that my grandfather had, touched and had molested.
Oh, wow.
So then my parents split up finally when I was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
No, at 10 years old. I was 10 years old when my parents finally split up. My mother gave my dad one more chance, and we moved to Virginia. And it was the worst time that we had ever had, with my dad. My dad I was the black sheep of the family, because my dad had always thought that I was not his child. So he wasn't very nice to me. He was very brutal to me. And plus, as you know, that I do have a different name, than most people in society. There's only 6,000 of us that have been born Bambi since 1960. So that also didn't help the journey of being bullied and taken advantage of, and not having a lot of friends, not having boyfriends, because my name took on a different meaning to people than what my true meaning of my name was. When I was a young girl, I didn't like my name. And so my name has a story of also pain to purpose. When I think about my story, and I think about my life as a young girl and as a young teenager, and even as a young adult, throughout my whole life, people had bullied me and made fun of me because of my name. And my name took on that identity. My name took on the identity that other people had said my name was. To some people, my name is a show name. It's a dancer name. It's a nightclub name. So people would call me that. People would ask me, where are you dancing tonight? Where are you going to be tonight? And I ended up taking on that identity in my life, because of all the pain and the hurt and the trauma that I had been through. That name also gave me an identity. And so when I was a young girl, there were a lot of things that had happened to me in my life, and, a lot of backseat cars I found myself in, trying to find out who I was and what God had planned for my life. When I was 16 years old, I tried to commit suicide, and a police officer ended up grabbing me off of the bridge and took me to a psychiatric center for children. And that's where I found out there that I actually was going to have a baby, and I had a teenage pregnancy. And I remember going into the room and surrendering my life to God. And I said, if there's truly a God, and you truly are a God, you need to save me and my baby, and I will honor you, and I will serve you all the days of my life. Didn't know what that entailed, didn't know what that meant, but I just knew that my baby needed to be saved. And my baby today is 37 years old. She has brought so much joy and love to me. And when you go back to my name, when I was about 32, 33 years old, I went to the courthouse, and I found out that you could change your name. And I knew that it was $800. I had gotten the paperwork, and I went to the beach, and I sat on this rock, where I found myself many days sitting on this rock at this beach that I was at. And I just cried out to God, and I said, you knew me from the foundations of time. You called me by name. Why would you ever call somebody a Bambi? Why would you do that to me? Why, and I asked all these questions, and I said, my name, I don't even have a meaning to my name. So that really affected me. It affected me, the abuse that I got because of my name and being bullied. So I told God, I gave God an ultimatum. And I said, I'm going to go to the bookstore, and if my name's not in that book, it's not in a meaning, I'm changing my name the next day. So I went to the bookstore, and, here this arrogant 32-year-old girl is making an ultimatum to God. But I went to that.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. So I went to the bookstore and I picked up all of the names, all the name books, set them down on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little hesitant because, I didn't know would I really go through, with doing this, would I really go through with the ultimatum? And my name is Bambi Lynn. My first name is Bambi. My middle name is Lynn. And I opened up the books and I found my name for the first time. And my name together means holy child. So to put that name together, it transformed. It was another thing from pain to purpose, which is the title of your podcast. It took all the pain away that I had dealt with throughout my whole entire life. And now it gave me a new meaning. It gave me grace. It was kind of like I was on a podcast and she said, that was your grace moment. And it transformed me to know that every time that somebody called out my name, they weren't calling out dancer. They were calling out holy child. My destiny was being a holy child, that when God did form me in my mother's womb and he did call me by name, he called me by name as a holy child, that he had a plan and a purpose for my life, a plan to prosper and not to harm me, but to give me a hope for my future. And it transformed, my life and my identity.
I think it's Tasha Cobb, if I'm not mistaken, that sings the song, You Know My Name.
Yes.
I love that song. And it doesn't matter what people call us. It matters who God calls us.
Yes. But it's a journey. It is a journey, and people needed to be willing. And I needed to be willing to have that conversation with God and know that God had big enough shoulders to hear his daughter cry out to him.
Yes. So when you were when you were with your mom, did she go to church?
No, my mom did not go to church, but she made sure that my brothers and sisters and I went to church every Sunday on a church bus. In our community, there was a church bus ministry that took us to church every Sunday. And I loved going to church. I loved singing the Sunday school songs on the bus and things like that. But when I was a young girl, I did love Jesus, but I felt like Jesus wouldn't love me, and I wasn't going to be allowed in his kingdom because my family didn't go to church. We were just a church, but I was just a church bus kid. I wasn't anybody of value. So for so long,
they call them like the church goers or something like that.
Right. I wasn't part of the family of people. We were just a bus. That all the riffraff and the raggeties, went to church on Sunday morning because their parents wanted to get rid of them for 4 hours. That's but I loved going to church, and I loved serving God, and I loved listening. I wasn't one of the church bus kids that sat in the back of the church and colored all over the pews. And I was up front because I just wanted to know who Jesus was. But I knew but I really felt that Jesus was never for me because I wasn't part of a family in the church.
And look at you now.
And look at me now, what God has done, and, what he has, how he has transformed me, how he has used, every moment of pain in my life. And he has created something marvelous. He has taken all of the ashes of my life and he has turned them into beauty. And I didn't realize that because I think I heard a statement the other day. It says all moments are key moments in your life. There is not one moment in your life that God's not going to use. There's not one moment in your life that God's not going to transform. There's not one moment in your life or one lie in your life that God's not going to feed you to the truth. And the truth is going to set you free. And I didn't realize until you always hear you always hear the verse, that God's going to turn your ashes into beauty. And and I think that sometimes we just wash over some things within the word of God and yep, he's going to do that. And there actually was a building in my complex that burnt down. And that verse became real to me because now all it was a pile of ash, and it had to be rebuilt. And that's what God does in our lives. What the enemy meant for evil, God came in and he meant it for good. And I'm not saying that God took my life and he wanted me to be abused, that he wanted me to be sexually assaulted, that he wanted me to have a teenage pregnancy. He wanted me to commit suicide. But all of those things God took, and he transformed his daughter into the image of him. And, and I think that sometimes we blame God for our past. We blame God for our hurts, when really the best thing that we can do is lift our hands up and say, I surrender all of this pain and all of this turmoil that I have been through in my life. And I'm willing to be on the potter's wheel. And I'm willing to know that you will transform me. And for us to know that when we are in the fire, there is somebody else in there with us. When we're in the lion's den, there is somebody in the lion's den with us that shuts the mouths of the lions. There is somebody with us at all times. When we're on the potter's wheel, the potter is with us. The architect is with us, and he is transforming us. I'm not the person that when I wrote my story, and it took me 3.5 weeks to write my book, because I had lived 54 years of my story. And when I had my book published and it came to my house, and I sat on my bed for 6 hours and I didn't move, and I read my story, and I closed the book of that story, and I cried throughout my whole story because it was my story. And when I closed the book of that story, I didn't know that girl anymore. But I knew now that I wrote my story so that other people can write theirs. I didn't know this poor girl that had been through so much in her life, but all I wanted to do was hug her. So my story is for me to be able to hug other people. My story, I chose to have the courage and the bravery to write my story so that other people can write theirs. We now live in a society today that we can tell our stories. When I was a young girl, you couldn't tell the secrets within your home. You couldn't tell.
Absolutely not. What goes on in this house stays in this house.
Stays in this. And so we have carried so much pain. We have carried, and even within cultures, I actually had a girl that I had gone to her house, and she had told me some of the things about her life, and I gave her one of my books. And 2 days later, she had finished my book, and she had called me, and she said, "You wrote my story. You talked to the deepest part of my soul. And my culture, you're not allowed to talk about what happened in your home." And and she was an African-American Black woman, totally broken, that somebody told her story and that she wasn't alone. And that's the purpose of my book. The purpose of my book, yes, I would love to be on the author circuit. I would love to make millions, like everybody, because this is your baby. But I want to see lives transformed. I want to see that they once were lost, but now they're found. I want to see redemption, into the hearts and into the souls of women that are walking around with a closet full of skeletons, with a closet full of pain. I want my story to start the journey of them opening up their closets and telling their stories and putting back the skeleton back together and turning the ashes into beauty. And that's my purpose.
That is so amazing. When we go through stuff, we don't think about like it's going to help us in the long run, all the things that I've been through. And my godmother used to tell me that, like, you're going to have a story for somebody else. And I used to be like, yay, me. Every time she would say it, I'd be like, yay, me. Yeah, this is great. And now I look back and I never thought that I would be here as an author and having a podcast and meeting some amazing people and sharing, stories with them so that we all can help other people. I never thought about that. I just felt like I was being punished and everything I was going through was hell. And now some of the things I went through, I can look back and be like, okay, this was to make me stronger. This was to help somebody else. And I've come across people that have been through what I've been through, what I went through since I wrote my book. And so I'm very grateful to have you here, to have, other people that have come on the platform to share their story that's not afraid, because it's a lot. Like when you write those books and you're writing it about trauma, you're literally reliving that. And people don't think about that. And then you get on a platform and then you have to talk about it. When you're called, you don't have a choice. Some people have a choice to talk about their story, but when you're called, you don't have a choice. Like, I don't have an option to stay silent anymore. This is what I was called to do. That's just that. Everybody may not agree with it, and that's okay. But for certain parts of my life, I have to open up. I have to speak up. I have to tell people what I've been through, because somebody out there has went through the same thing that I've been through. And if we can save one person, our job is done.
Absolutely. And just like I said prior to, us starting the podcast, that I'm starting, I've wrote a book, I wrote 2 books. I started a website and blogging, and, I'm starting to, and then I'm podcasts, and now I'm starting to, venture out to do, speaking engagements. But in that, my daughter, bought a Cricut. She brought everything that she needed, to buy for me to be able to have t-shirts. And one of the t-shirts that I wanted, it says, "My story, your first aid kit," because our stories are not for us. And if we could realize that our stories are not for us, our stories is because people behind us are looking, and they're trying to find somebody that will take their hand and will walk the journey with them. Because we now live in a society today that everybody's open about their lives. I do think that some of this stuff is, a little bit too much. There needs to be a pendulum shift. But
Yeah.
now we can be heroes in our own lives, and we can use our lives for the kingdom of God. My life, if I didn't go through the things that I went through, when I was going through it, I was mad. I was mad at God. I was mad. How dare you say you love me, but I'm going through this. But he was taking all of that, and he was forming the person that I am today. I had to I didn't know who I was, because all I knew was trauma. So I reacted always in the trauma. I reacted everything that I've been through. I started reacting that way and believing the stories that the enemy planted in my head, that, I deserve this, or you're just second class. God doesn't love you. And it fed the narrative of my trauma. But when a person finally gets sick and tired of being sick and tired of having to carry that weight and that burden of it all, you finally are able to let it go. It's one of my best books that I've ever read. There's a couple of that, the story of the Pilgrim's Progress, how they're going on this journey. And there's a book called Hinds Feet in High Places. And it's the funny thing, it's about a deer, and the deer is named Much Afraid. And Much Afraid has to go through this journey in her life, and she has to get rid of the loud voices in her life and listen to the small voice, the small, still voice. And she has to go on this journey of being able to know what is the truth and what is the lie, what is the loud voices that are feeding her and like pecking at her, but what is that still small voice that's asking you to go by the still waters, and he's going to restore your soul. The other book that had touched my life was the book called The Shack. That book and that movie transformed me, because it began to show me the bigger picture of God. We have this finite mind. We have this mind that we can only, it's kind of like we're horses with blinders on, and we only have these blinders, but we don't see the full picture. We don't see the people before us and what they had to go through. We don't see the loving God that wants everybody to know him, to serve him, and to have their place in heaven with him. We don't see that. I only saw an uncle that chose to take advantage of me, and I had so much hate and so much unforgiveness, in my heart. But when I went through the journey of forgiving him, I had to see him also as a broken person, because only a broken person would take advantage of a young girl.
Broken people hurt.
They hurt people. My dad was an alcoholic, was a brutal alcoholic. And then I found out that when my dad was 7 or 8 years old, he took off on a bicycle and he got hit by a car. And and they didn't think that my dad was going to live. And and then my dad was brought up. His father was an alcoholic. All of his brothers were alcoholics.
So it was a generational cycle.
Yeah. But now looking at it, I can have forgiveness and empathy for my dad, how much he carried on his own shoulders. And when you begin to tell your story, you don't have to carry it anymore on your shoulders. God takes it. And we can lay it down at the foot of the cross. When I think about the the woman with the issue of blood, she didn't care anymore that there were people around Jesus. She didn't care anymore.
The hem of his garment.
Oh, she just wanted to have one touch, because she knew that that one touch, just that little touch, would transform her. And that's me. And that's women that are going from pain to purpose. I just want that one touch, and then God can take care of the rest. I want to know that when God looks at me, he doesn't necessarily see me, but he sees what his son did for me at the cross. So when God looks at me, he already sees a finished work. And I'm just working it out by renewing my mind daily, by renewing my mind of the stories that I have believed about myself, the stories that I have taken on as my identity. And God's just taking us through a journey and saying, no, I want you to see yourself and how I see you. I see you as royalty, Bambi. I see you as the daughter of the king. I see you as redeemed. I see you as set free. And that's what he wants to do for every single one of his daughters. He wants us, instead of like attacking each other, he wants us to lock arms with each other and say, okay, you know what? Let me go through the journey with you, because we're not an island. We are a community, and we need to cross those barriers to know that we have been hurt, that we have been hurting little girls, but that have been turned into royalty. But for such a time as this, you were created for such a time as this. I can't do your job, and I can't influence your sphere of people. You were created for that. I was created for the sphere of people that God was going to give in my life.
Yes.
And we have to just be redeemed and know that we are redeemed, know that we are set free, know that God loves us, and he loves us so much that he would have just came for me. He would have just came. He would have sent his only begotten son just for me. That's royalty.
Yes.
That's purpose.
Yes. So I know you said you used to talk to this doll when you was going through all this. So tell our audience about this doll.
My doll I received her when I was 6 years old. Every year, my mom would make a doll for my sister and I. But this doll.
Oh, your mom made it.
My mom made it. Yes. Every year she would make a doll for me. And she made this doll. And in 1979, there was a movie that came out. It was called the Orphan Train. And what it was all of these kids in New York City that were orphans, and a mission community decided to take these children. And this is, this happened a lot. This was true, that they would take the children from New York City and they would put them on a train, and they would send them out west, and then people would adopt them. So there was a girl on the train, and in the mission, and her name was Josephine, but nobody knew. She called herself Joey because she acted like a boy, so she could be able to do newspapers, because at that time, only men did things. But when she was on the train, it was revealed the fact that she was a girl, and her name was Josephine Priscilla. And I named my doll from that little girl on the orphan train, which I think, looking back, I think, oh my goodness, how God orders the steps of the righteous. So I bought her, so I had her. She was really pretty when she was, when I got her for Christmas that year. And she just went on a journey with me. Whenever something happened to me, I would grab hold of my Josephine. Whenever something, hurt me, I would grab hold of my Josephine. So she knew my secrets. She knew my pain. She carried, all of those secrets. She carried all of my tears. And now that I realize that her name was Josephine Priscilla, Josephine comes from Joseph, and Joseph, was thrown away, was put into the pit by their brothers, and everybody, he was kind of like the black sheep, because, all the brothers in the Word of God didn't like him, so they wanted to sell him into slavery. So here, Josephine, and then Priscilla was one of the first women pastors, one of the first women that told about the gospel and followed Jesus. So 47 years ago, I had this doll, and I named her Josephine Priscilla. I mean, God orchestrates everything.
I think God has a sense of humor.
He sure does. Yeah.
I think he has a sense of humor.
He sure
Now, I
does.
didn't have a doll, but well, I mean, I played with baby dolls when I was a kid, but I didn't have a doll that I would talk to when I was going through something. But I did, and I know some people, there's other people that do. Everybody has a way of dealing with what they're going through. But I used to have a diary that I would write things in, and every time I left home, I would take that diary with me because the diary had all my feelings in there. So I would not go anywhere without that diary because I didn't want anybody to know about, well, I wanted people to know how I felt, but it was like nobody would care though if they knew. Nobody was going to do anything. Nothing was going to change, in my home life. If anything, it probably would make it worse because I was speaking out and saying the things that was going on. So I would just take that diary with me. And then as I got older, I just started writing like journaling. I would journal a lot or whatever, and pray through it because it was difficult. And again, I'll say it's not easy getting in front of people, talking about the pain and you can talk about the purpose, but the pain part is not easy because we take a chance of people judging us, whether it's family, friends, or just outside people, period. So I commend you for coming on here and telling all the family secrets.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that I did journal a lot. I used to journal all the time, and then I had an ex-husband that his way of getting back at me, so to speak, is that he would take my things and he would destroy them. And he took all of my journals and he burned them and threw them into a dumpster. And so for a long time, I didn't write anymore because I was afraid of putting anything on paper. So for me to be able to write a book that now it is, people have bought it from all over different countries. It's on bookshelves, it's on library shelves. Here I have a book that nobody can destroy. Nobody can take my story and rip it up and burn it and throw it into a dumpster because now my story is out there for all the world to see. And my story is out there to help heal the brokenhearted. So what he meant for evil, God said, let me tell you, I'm going to mean it for good.
Yes. And what people don't understand is even though you're writing about your life, you're not writing this to bash somebody. You're not trying to hurt somebody. You have gone through the healing process. Some people are still going through the healing process. And when you write your stories, you're getting it out. How can you heal if you don't talk about it? People always talk about you need to heal, you need to let this go. But you can't expect for a person to heal and let something go if you don't want them to talk about it to get it out. We tell
Absolutely.
people that they need to be transformed, they need to be delivered, they need to heal, they need to be forgiving. But how can you do all those things if you're supposed to hold it all inside, and then you have a family dinner or function or whatever, and you're all sitting there knowing there's an elephant in the room,
Yep.
and that there's people that are hurting in the family. And you
Absolutely.
know what the reason is because it's been talked about before. And even
Absolutely.
if it hasn't been talked about, somebody knows.
Absolutely.
And the fact that somebody knows and you're choosing to be silent and not help the person that's in pain, I just don't agree with it. It's not okay. I tell people that if you're hurting, I tell them get the counseling. Don't listen to family or friends that's going to tell you that you're crazy or something's wrong with you, because how can you heal? Like, I believe that just like God created, he's given us people to check our blood. He's given us primary care doctors. He's also given us counselors and therapists to help us through life. And you can get a Christian based counselor, or go through your insurance. It still could be Christian based. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's a big stigma out there to just not talk about it. And if you talk about it, or if you get the help, what people say, if you go get the help, something's wrong with you.
Well, what I did, it took me 25 years to write my story, because when I needed to go through that process, I needed to go through the forgiving process and the healing process, to be able to write my story, that when people read it, they don't read hate, they don't read resentment, that I didn't do it for the sole purpose of resentment and for unforgiveness. I did it because I wanted to be set free and I wanted others to be set free. And, and just recently I wrote a blog that's going to come out next week on my, on my website. And it's about when you are dealing with people are in trauma. And so I was just having a conversation with one of my friends. You have to look at that person that is in trauma and is always in chaos as like a burn patient. I had gotten burned years ago and a pressure canner had blown up on me. And I had my breast burned and I had to go to the hospital, and I was there for 17 days. And for 5 of those days, 2 times a day, 5 days straight, they had me on a metal bed, my hands tied, and they jacked me up with morphine and started scrubbing the residue with a Brillo pad, off. So when I think about that with trauma, and I think about that with people that haven't started the process, they're on a metal bed being tied up in the residue, because the trauma is not going to happen again. It's the residue of the trauma that is keeping you in bondage. It's the residue of the trauma that's keeping you hurt. It's the residue of the trauma that is not healing your heart. So we need to get rid of that residue. The difficulty is that so many people they're safe in their trauma. They're safe in their identity, and they're safe. And then sometimes we don't call people up higher. We don't call people up and say, you know what? It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt to be put on this metal bed and being Brillo pad. But after it's done, there's not going to be any more residue of what you've been through. All there's going to be is now victory. And so we need to give grace to people that are still walking through their trauma. And then when we've already been people that have gone through the trauma and have gotten rid of the residue of it, we still have a scar to tell the story, but there's no more residue. We need to be willing to be those people, to be those friends, to be those confidants, to be those counselors for those that are still walking through their trauma.
I say, I don't want to be a victim. I want to be victorious. But the only way to do that is to talk about it, to work on the healing journey, to get through it so that you can move forward and help other people, so that you don't, as a broken person, bleed on somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if more podcasts, if more conversations, more people, are willing to, to be vulnerable, because this is vulnerable. This is vulnerable for you to have a podcast to tell your story. It's vulnerable for me to be able to write a book and to be able to continue to tell my story. But I know that we are being vulnerable because God has given us a purpose. God has given us a destiny. He has given us a mission. And that mission is to use Him as our platform to say He wants to set you free. He wants to come into your life, and He wants to take all the dirtiness and all the pain and the agony, and He wants to wash it clean. He wants you to know that you can be washed by the blood, and that you can be washed by Him, and that you can come out as scarlet and white as snow. But we have to be vulnerable. We have to be willing. We have to be brave, to continue to tell our stories.
Yes, yes, yes. And you've been through the fire and you don't even look like it.
You don't even look like it.
Came out with no smoke.
I did come out with some scars, but you know what? Those scars tell a story, and I'm willing to continue to tell that story.
When I started this podcast, this was not the purpose that I thought. This was not the purpose. I was just supposed to write the book. That was it. And I was just going to write this book. And it went from me writing the book to wanting to speak after that, to wanting to continue to write. And then this podcast came up. So God has a sense of humor.
Sure does.
When I thought I was done, that was it. I was just gonna do that one project and that was it, and I was gonna move on. But he has so many other things for me to do to be able to help other people. That's
And for us, for me, I as women, we kind of like have 3 or 4 different jobs throughout our lives. I was a mom, I homeschooled my kids, I'm a nana, I'm a grandma, I'm a wife. I was a wife, I'm not a wife now. But now I'm in a new journey. I'm in the next phase of my life, because now, and that's what he does. He takes our moments and he keeps having us walk forward. I'm in the moment of becoming. I'm in the moment of finding out who Bambi was even before all of this other stuff, and in the journey of loving myself and being able to look in a mirror and put on my own superhero cape. I
But
don't
wait a
need.
minute. It's something about when you can look in the mirror and say, I am wonderfully and beautifully made. I
Absolutely.
am unique. I am a child of God. And you know it and you feel it, and you are not waiting for somebody to tell you that you're beautiful. That's when
Absolutely.
you really love yourself.
Absolutely. And that's what I do. And what I do also to women is that I put a cape on them and said that you're your own superhero. You don't need to be, you don't
Yes.
need to love Wonder Woman and have Wonder Woman poster all over. You just need to look in the mirror and realize that you are a superhero because you've survived your story. And I put a crown on their heads and say, fix your crown because you're the daughter of the king, and have them look look in the mirror and see what God sees. And there's years ago, God had given me a dream or a vision or, whatever it was. But it was me walking on a stage and talking and going in front of a platform and like a podium. And when I looked out to the audience, everybody looked dirty. Everybody looked homeless, and they had words written across to their chest that, they were shamed. They were unforgiven. They were ugly, and all these different words. And I began to tell my testimony, and I began to tell what God had done in my life and how he had transformed me. And as I looked out in the audience again, when I was telling my story, their clothing had changed. They looked clean. They didn't look homeless anymore. And they had new words written across their chests that forgiven, blessed, set free, the daughter of the king. So when I think back to that vision, or I think back to that dream or whatever it was, I know that was God showing me that was my mission. I knew that was God showing me that he had called me to call other women forth. He had called me to be able to write my story and to use my story to be able to tell you that you can write yours. He's given me a purpose. He's given me a plan for my life. He's given me my why, in my life. And for us to be able to cross platforms and to be able to lock arms with different demographics, different cultures, different ethnic groups, because we've all been through pain. And for us to be able to lock arms together and say, we are a family and we're going to march forward and to set the captive free. We no longer live in the jail cell anymore. And God has given us people within the word of God and women within the word of God to be able to show us the beginning to the end. He's beginning to show us, when you look at the story of Mary Magdalene, and here she had 7 demons, but you knew that she was set free because she was one of God's, precious followers that loved him. So she no longer was in a prison cell anymore. And you need to look at the women of the Bible and see that those are your people. Those are your heroes that you need to look to. Those are the heroes that God wanted, us to know. When you think about the woman that lowered her hair to wash his feet, she didn't care what anybody said to her in the room, but God told her. But Jesus said, this very act that this woman did will give her an identity from generations. And the very act that we are doing as women of God and as women of purpose, God has given you something that will last that will last in eternity. The prison gates has set us free. We no longer live within the prison gates.
The chains have been broken.
The chains have been broken.
So what's next for you?
Next for me? Well, I am writing my 3rd book. And it's funny that it is called The God Who Sees. as Hagar was was a woman that got to name God as she was thrown into the desert by Sarah, and the God who sees. And what I have done is that I've taken different women of the Bible, and I've made them relatable today. I've made them that the stories are something that we can that we can glean from. One of the stories that I wrote was about Elisha and the woman, the widow that was all by herself. And Elijah comes to the house and says, hey, I need some bread. And she tells him, if I make this will be my last bread, and then my son and I will die. And I tell the story of how he came to the house and they never saw, the wood pile that needed to be, taken care of. He didn't see the fence that needed to be fixed. He comes into a single mother's home that is desolate. And he says, I need some bread. And, her very act is that she had to make him that loaf of bread. That was her only loaf of bread that she was going to have left. She had to make that loaf of bread in faith before he told her, now I want you to go and I want you to fill all these pots. She had to do that in faith, knowing that if she made this bread and God didn't show up, she was dying. Yeah. And out of that act of obedience. And, and that's what God does in our lives. He's waiting for an act of obedience. He's waiting for us to give up our last whatever. And so what I did is that I told those stories in that way. I told the story of Job's wife with empathy, because what mother wasn't going to turn her back to see if the rest of her children were coming? Not that she didn't obey God, and I'm not debating that. But as a mom, I can now have empathy for her because she left 2 children behind. So what mother isn't going to look quick to see, oh my goodness, there's another child coming with me? So I told it, so that was the purpose of the book. It should come out in about a year. And I'm looking for speaking engagements for God to use me, to be able to go to women and shelters and different places to be able to tell my story and to be able to help others, to be able to tell theirs.
Well, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Please continue to tell your story. Continue to get on other podcast shows. Continue to send those letters out, to do those speaking engagements so that people can hear your story and they can know that they're not alone and they can start their healing journey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wish you blessings on top of blessings. I know that you're going to be amazing and continue to do well. For our audience, remember, it is only pain until you discover your purpose and start your healing journey. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.